slow. Exit, kick, enter, enter. A little faster. In this scenario, my opponent and me begin in opposite fighting stances. He throws a right cross, and I counter by stepping my lead foot to the outside of his lead foot. This removes my head from my center line. At the same time, I throw a cross of my own, landing to my opponent's face. Although we have already covered this technique, my opponent's reaction is different. Instead of backing away after I land the punch, he drops his elevation and shoots in for a takedown. Opponents will often do this when injured. To prevent him from accomplishing his goal, I position my elbows in front of his shoulders. Notice how this makes it very difficult for him to reach my legs. As he drives forward, reaching, I step back and then turn and pivot around him. Notice how this disrupts his forward momentum. After completing the turn, I push him away from me, land a kick, and then throw a punch. He enters, I defend, kick, and punch. Fast. Now I show how to counter a cross using a spinning back kick. This technique requires more distance between you and your opponent. If you're close, not only will your opponent be able to hit you, but you won't have enough room to land the kick. To prevent the technique from working against me, I will retract my lead leg as my opponent punches to create distance between us. Then I will kick. Slow. And now fast. One more time. I will create space when my opponent throws his punch by retracting my lead leg and then kick. Slow. And now fast. Now I spar with my brother using the countering techniques I just demonstrated. A lot of times when you throw a punch such as a jab, your opponent will drop his elevation to evade the strike and then quickly shoot in underneath the strike and go for a takedown. As long as you perceive his elevation drop, you can counter using this technique. So I throw a jab, my opponent ducks underneath it and shoots in. Having spotted his elevation drop, I slide my lead leg back as I pull my jab back into my stance. At the same time, I pivot on my back foot and throw a rear uppercut. Normal movement. A little faster. Once more, I throw a jab, my opponent shoots in, and I counter with the uppercut. This is another technique for countering a takedown. So, my opponent comes forward to scoop up my legs. To counter, I place one hand on his head and the other hand on his shoulder, slide my lead foot back slightly, and throw a rear knee to his face. If your opponent is especially close when he shoots in, You might need to retract your front leg more in order for the technique to work. This is something you will get the hang of during training. You will develop a better understanding of distance. Let's do it again at normal speed. Now fast. Once more slowly. And now fast. When your opponent shoots in for a takedown, a lot of times you won't have the time or footwork needed to evade his attack. In such a situation, your elbows are very important. When my opponent comes in, I will drive my elbows in front of his shoulders to slow his forward progress. If your elbows are up, there is nothing stopping him from entering and controlling your legs. Your elbows must be placed in front of his shoulders. This stops him cold. Once accomplished, I will place one hand over the other or simply place my palms on the back of my opponent's head. No matter which grip I choose, I retract my hips to create distance. Then, the next step is to drive my knee forward, striking my opponent's midsection or face. Now normal speed. First, block. Slowly. He enters and I block. Then I enter with the knee. Now fast. If your goal is to keep a fight standing, then you need to know how to avoid your opponent's takedowns by sprawling and then working back to your feet. I demonstrate how to do this in the following sequence. In this technique, your arms play a very important role. As my opponent shoots in, I dive both of my arms in front of his near shoulder to stifle his forward energy. For the best results, I cup my arms underneath his body on his torso and paste my torso to his back. As he reaches for my legs, I drive my hips down to the mat. With my upper body driving into his upper body, as my legs go back, his energy is redirected downward instead of into me. Notice how even when I land, I keep my arms tucked under his body for control. To get back to my feet from the sprawl control position, I pull my arms out from underneath his body and place my left hand on the back of his head. By pushing down into his head, I can prevent him from redirecting his energy forward. Remember, where the head goes, the body follows. From there, I pop back up to my feet. Driving your hips to the mat as you sprawl your legs back is very important because it prevents your opponent from latching onto your legs and redirects his forward energy into the ground. If you keep your hips forward when you go down and your opponent is an explosive wrestler, he will be able to latch onto your legs, draw them into his body, and then score the takedown. If your legs are back and your hips flat to the mat, he won't be able to reach them. Now I demonstrate how to sprawl, which is quite different from the takedown defense I've already showed. When my opponent shoots in, I pummel my left arm underneath his right arm. My right arm is to the outside of my opponent's left arm. As he comes forward, I lower my weight onto him and sprawl my legs back. Once accomplished, I reach my left arm underneath his body and obtain control of his right arm and pull it into his body. Hugging my body to his, I reach my right arm over his body and circle around to his back. Notice how my right arm is tight to his body. With my opponent controlled, I am now free to strike. I can punch while kneeling. Or I can come up, keep my hands on my opponent to hold him down, and kick to his midsection. To cause the most damage, you don't want to kick with the top of your foot. You want to kick with the ball of your foot. Now faster.
Empurra.
When my opponent shoots in, I block by placing my elbows in front of his shoulders and sprawling my hips back. As I demonstrated before, this sets me up perfectly to throw a knee. However,